So years ago, a very weird concept sort of came about in my study of the human body and trying to help patients heal from their injuries. And one was sort of self-immobilization fibrosis. Wow, big word, self-immobilization. Meaning you had pain, and we see this quite often with a condition called frozen shoulder, where somebody begins to use their body, they experience some pain, so they stop using their body. It makes a lot of sense. The problem is that can really run amok, where somebody is so averse to pain that they begin to stop using the part. So what happens? Well, you would imagine this wouldn't happen, but if I don't move my shoulder for a period of time, my shoulder won't move. Now, I saw this very early in my career in working with a lot of people that had been put in casts. This was before the day where we use air casts that could be taken off and the patients could move throughout the process of healing. And it was in a phase of my life where medicine treated injuries with a lot more of a kit glove, where we put a cast on it. And we'd take that cast off the patient's arm or whatever part it was, and the part would be like literally frozen in place. And it would take me another 6 months to straighten it out. That's why I try to get people to use air casts and to use what they call continuous passive motion machines very quickly. Most of medicine, physical therapy are quite aware of this now, and most of you guys are getting these modalities that are either sent to your home, so post-surgically you're getting moved quite a bit. But please listen to this, the modern ways of thinking about these problems. You want to obviously be very responsible, only doing motions that your body can handle and letting pain be your guide, but you do not want to not use it at all. So in studying all this, I bumped into a guy that I found to be really entertaining and quite interesting. He started as a massage therapist. He had a lot of years of working on people like me and picking up on what it was he was putting his hands on. In one of my other videos, I talk about trigger point development and this sort of gelatinous feeling that my hands would give me on some patients that I'd push down on that spot, let's say in the upper back or trapezius area. Everybody loves when you come up from behind them and you squeeze in and you grab those tight muscles and those knots. And sometimes those knots feel sort of, especially in younger people, a little gelatinous. There's like a softness to it, but they hurt a lot. The nervous tissue is a little aggravated or inflamed within the muscle tissue. Sometimes later in life they become harder and harder, more rigid and fibrous. And so Dr. Gil Hedley, he's a PhD. So obviously a massage therapist, a manual therapist for many years, but he, having the same passion and sort of the desire to understand the body deeper, started to do something that most of us would never do. He started doing cadaver work. And in the video that I had posted on my old website, it showed him cutting through, and it showed a concept called Fuzz. He called it Fuzz. So he noted in his dissections that as he was cutting through certain people, there was a lot of fuzz or a lot of scarring in between some of the layers of fascia. And so if you imagine this fascia, so for instance with my shoulder blade, as I raise my arm over my head, my shoulder blade must rotate on a rounded structure of my rib cage, and there's numerous fascial layers there, down from the ribs, down to the tissue above the ribs, so the musculature, and then there are a very complex set of interactions of like middle trapezius, rhomboid major and minor. They're all going in different directions, which gives me the ability to bring my humeral bone rotating in my glenoid fossa, but all the while my shoulder blade moving with it. And there's another video I have here about scapulothoracic rhythm that discusses some of this. But in this one, we're talking about Dr. Hedley's dissection of fascia, fuzz that develops for self-immobilization fibrosis, and the fact that a joint line can actually become locked and frozen without an MRI showing a tear or any problem to the glenohumeral joint, which is where most of the imaging. So the X-ray, of course, would be looking at only the bones. The MRI has a more detailed look at it, showing the labrum, showing tendons, and showing more detail. But what if you've got somebody who walks in your office like I did, who had nothing in X-ray, nothing in MRI, and couldn't move their arm? Now that's a head scratcher. That's what led me in the direction to even this video. But earlier in my life I was saying, well, how could somebody have not used their body part? So they don't know how they injured themselves, and yet they can't and extremely painful too. I would try to lift their arm and do something, and they would scream in pain. It would take me 6 months to unwind these problems. So these things brought to mind, and it's what led me to look into Dr. Hedley's work. And I love the way he sliced through all the tissue, showed scar tissue. So another thing you hear about all the time, I have patients come in every single week that have been to other practitioners, and they come in and they say, I think it's scar tissue, doc. Well, I hope it is. Scar tissue is a natural process. It is the end stage of a healing. You're going to be inflamed. There's no scar tissue. Inflammation is a chemical event taking place around an injured tissue. Then there's a proliferative phase that I've discussed again in other videos that I've made. That is the proliferation of new cells, new types of cells that are pouring in. So macrophages being an example of that, to engulf broken cells, drag them away. And then the beauty is it's fibroblastic migration. The third phase of the healing process lays down scar tissue. You want scar tissue. You just don't want scar tissue to be random. You don't want scar tissue to be perhaps tethered. So one of the nasty indications of scar tissue is if I had an injured neck, chronically injured. So maybe as a child I fell and I hurt it and it healed. And then later in my life I fell off my skateboard, and later in my life I was in a car accident. The cumulative effect of scar tissue repair, which happens in most of us because life definitely damages things and our body's always attempting at least to repair itself, is the laying down of scar tissue. So if the accumulation of the scar tissue through these periods of our life where you've injured yourself and you've repaired it begins to tether. So in the case of a neck injury, one of the things that you see quite often is that nerve roots as they exit the lateral canal. So in my central nervous system, I've got the cord, but I've got the nerves that exit, that come out to my body, that are moving out of a small hole in my spine called the lateral foramen. Now there's a classic place where tethering of scar tissue can be a really nasty problem, because imagine I keep on injuring my neck in relatively the same place, and each progressive bout of scar tissue begins to tether the nerves. So now when I move my arm, the nervous system can't move out of the holes, and now I've got scar tissue that is tethering to something else that I don't want it to. The most fascinating and the most sort of, I think, most enjoyable part of what I do for a living is, as an artist does, I mold it like clay. If I've got somebody that comes in here in the early stage of an injury process, it's just really a lot of fun to take this injury, know how severe it is, time these phases of the injury process so that at the end of the day, I've got a beautifully repaired structure that works just like the old equipment did, okay? Scar tissue is normal. The art of scar tissue is to know how it works, how it lays down, and the movement patterns that you would need to do while that part is healing. So again, going back to our frozen shoulder, if I've got a shoulder that doesn't work and it's locked in place, and I begin to stretch the capsular tissue where that scar is formed, in some cases, again, it's a complex condition, but we'll keep it simple for this video, in that scar tissue is being laid down in those capsular fibers, and there's these white collagen proteoglycan materials that are being laid down. And if I do nothing and I just sit here and I trap my arm in a sling and I say, oh my God, I want to avoid pain forever, it would be a very amorphous structure like you see I've drawn here. But imagine if I start doing some movement patterns, I'm going to tug, force load across, and I'm going to form that matrix that's going to be a beautiful, dense scar at the end of the day that can handle life afterwards, so that not only is the inflammatory and proliferative phase taken care of, but the scar tissue phase has been laid down properly. So that's another important element to scar, is to put loads in various planes. So for a shoulder, for instance, I would want my shoulder to be able to do this. I would want it to do this. I would want it to go backwards. And so I must lay down forces through the healing process so that at the end of the healing, my shoulder works in all the planes of motion that I want it to work. So I hope you enjoyed these concepts. Again, let your body heal itself. Come back to the channel. Go to these learning concepts pages. You're going to learn a lot about how the body works, and then go to my YouTube channel, learn even more, and then head over to the other portions of my website that will teach you some therapeutic options that are free and at home. Take care.